Hi, I'm Alexandria Dunham, and this is an educational class on construction hazard mitigation. Human toxicants are endemic to the construction industry. Although scientific communities universally eschew their toxicity, the translation and transitions of toxicology knowledge through practices, systems, legislation, and occupational hygiene infrastructure are noticeably ostensible. There is an implicit assumption that the construction participant values knowledge of critical toxicology. However, effective translation of that knowledge presents several challenges due to the constraining influences of retail managers, availability of materials and toxicology information, operational and project drivers, regulation, and a profound lack of curiosity in pondering the systemic imposition of incorporating known human toxicants into occupier and user assets. The long-term health effects of human toxicant exposures are considerable. Consequently, professional participants in architecture, design engineering, approving authorities, restoration engineering, heritage building practitioners, and related stakeholders need an awareness of the potential toxicants, their possible sources, long-term health implications, and practices for amelioration related to toxicant control and harm reduction. The question is, how do we manage these toxic environments considering this scary corpus of potential harm? Understanding and managing human toxicants in the built environment. The systemic hazard environment of the construction industry and specialist aspects of pure materials are known to health affected individuals. Every modern society considers the basic understanding of what is toxic because knowledge about specific toxic potentials can assist members in making choices that minimize total exposure in the domestic and occupational environment. The reporting of human toxicants in the environment is widespread. Investigations are primarily concerned with immediate acute responses across all case causes and are required for first responses to toxicant escalations of incidents. Construction activities are associated with various physical hazards to workers, affecting millions of workers each year. These hazards are well known and efforts are being made to mitigate them. It is less acknowledged how much workers are exposed to human toxicants during construction. Consequently, their high risks are under-recognized. As outlined in greater detail below, shotcrete workers in particular suffer very high exposures to respirable dust, cobalt, and chromium, as well as to high molecular weight polyaromatic hydrocarbons. Environmental or biological media measurements are not yet available to directly link those exposures to acute or chronic adverse health effects. Still, given what is known from anomalous exposures, it is reasonable to expect that a host of work-related health conditions may be observed in this and conceivably other populations. The evident lack of health hazard awareness has been used to justify studying the toxicant exposures of construction workers and understanding their current unsystemic prevention and mitigation in parallel to this research. There is a good deal of regulation in place trying to protect construction workers from death and accidents at work. However, with few exceptions, the focus is almost entirely on trauma. There are known human toxicants if exposures are allowed to accumulate significantly over time, but not the myriad of metals, silicas, and other toxicants and mixtures to which workers may be exposed from the mine shaft to the smokestacks, with injurious effects occurring both shortly after that and as a result of very long-term continuous low-level occupational accumulation exposure of non-industry outlier levels. Regulations require employers to disclose health hazards to workers and those downstream from employers who provide them with hazardous chemicals. The public has a correspondingly limited view of health hazards associated with construction. Generally, if they are an extreme enough to, to front page a tragedy, other than that, the initial concern of residents and passerbys tends to extend to respiratory and dust mask regulatory concerns. However, safety shortfalls in the construction industry are a significant part of the business cases for safe chemistry and better safety cultures. There are direct and indirect costs to the healthcare and insurance system, individuals, families, and society when their chosen occupation threatens people's health. Educating vulnerable workers who are potentially being exposed to intoxicants in their work and empowering them with tools to improve their work conditions is neither a luxury nor a reform target. It is the point. Risks are multifactorial, and although there are cases of construction occupational fatalities occurring from acute toxicant exposures, worker health risks are more typically associated with chronic or chronic worker exposures, making the risk effects less obvious. There is currently an ongoing public health concern with the increased numbers of cancers and illnesses attributed to human toxicant exposures, which are tracked by a few data sources. The fatality rates of toxic and chemical substance exposures were responsible for 984 deaths in 2019, which increased to 1,063 in 2020. Reports indicated more than 90,000 illnesses and injuries, of which 27% were musculoskeletal, and 400 deaths attributed to toxic materials in construction. Half of these affected ongoing construction and other half were attributed to renovation and reconstruction projects. In 2019, 22.14% of construction workers' deaths in the U.S. were from toxic substance exposure. This indicates a steady increase in deaths in the past 3 years, with 21.98% and 19.96% in 2018 and 2017, respectively. Over the past 27 years, an average of 26% of construction worker fatalities were from toxicant exposure, with it reaching a maximum of 47% in 1993. Case studies illustrate some of the known exposure and toxicity risks in construction. These statistics support and validate their earlier discussions regarding safety worker concerns, higher job dissatisfaction and intention to quit, and heightened concern for the recent regulatory focus on common compliance in light of these worker symptoms and illnesses, despite the adoption of regulations and recommendations. Here we are going into relevant statistics, injuries, and illnesses. 3,965 out of 5,333, 74.5%, lost time injuries in the construction industry in 2019 were due to falls, being struck by objects, being caught in between, and electrocutions. An additional 61 fatal struck by object injuries were reported in 2019, leading to an estimated 5,250 lost time construction injuries. The estimated non-fatal lost time construction injuries in 2019 are 5.4% lower than the case for 2018 and 3.1% lower than in 2017. A survey of 2,000 construction workers indicate that workers often transport hazardous materials and do not receive safety training in construction. Construction workers perform site development, framing, roofing, siding, painting, and cleanup tasks. Work occurs in confined spaces for plumbing and electrical workers within the construction industry. Work may also occur on multiple levels of supported scaffolds by frame crews or electrical workers. These tasks in workplace environments are associated with significant upstream toxicant exposures. Injuries in construction workers are classified as fatal, resulting in lost time from work, or non-fatal. The distinction between the different groups of construction injuries is relevant because lost time and permanent disability claims are an economic cost of illness and injury to workers. In 2019, 19,420,200 non-fatal workplace injuries and illnesses were reported in the United States. This totals 2.8 incidents per 100 full-time workers according to employer reports. The majority of research on hazards in the workplace does not take gender, age, or other factors into account when determining health effects. In contrast to national surveys of the clinical populations where research has been focused, Latinos comprise 25 to 30% of the construction labor force within the United States. Linguistic isolation is an essential yet understudied risk factor for toxicant exposure due to the limited occupational safety information available to Spanish-speaking communities. This is a significant knowledge gap, particularly in the monolingual Spanish-speaking population in the U.S. construction industry. In 2019, young workers made up 14% of non-fatal injuries and illnesses, including 33.2% in the 18 to 19 age group. In 2017, the national median size of construction companies was 5 employees. As an individual company, 7% of all construction firms employ fewer than 20 employees, and 60% employ fewer than 100. Temp workers comprise 22.2% of non-fatal injuries in construction in 2014, a 42% increase from 2011. In 2018, 15.48% of the construction industry was foreign-born, a rise from 14.59% in 2017. Reports indicate that 25% of sheet metal workers, 29% of pipe fitters, 30% of laborers, 7% of iron workers, and 11% of utility workers are women. Black individuals hold 7% of U.S. construction craft jobs. However, Black individuals are overrepresented in construction fatalities across ages. Although many hazardous chemicals and toxic heavy metals are presented on construction sites, some are more common than others. Heavy metals often used in construction include lead and cadmium. Before it was discovered to harm humans, large quantities of lead were used to make paint, ceramic glazes, and solder. Familiar sources of lead exposure include sanding, stripping, cutting into lead paint, demolition, and spray painting. Construction workers may use lead in equipment repairs, apply lead-based membranes around window sills, and install lead frame flues, among other activities. Crystalline free silica is a natural mineral part of the Earth's crust. Silica is found primarily in quartz, sand, and granite. Activities such as cutting block or rocks, drilling, sanding, and machine milling create crystalline silica dust when performed on natural substances. Tools that emit silica dust include grinders, saws, drywall routers, jackhammers, and heavy equipment used for dry earth moving. Intense exposure to crystalline silica dust over days or weeks can cause difficulty breathing, silicosis, and kidney damage in the case of a very high silica content. Inhaling silica dust over the permissible exposure level can cause lung cancer. Products that contain VOCs with an ionic class fire retardant, including roofing tapes, sealants, and adhesives. Some buildings built before 1980 may contain asbestos. Only a handful of products in the U.S. today still use asbestos, including a few products such as vinyl sheet flooring, pipe wrap, and some specialty gaskets. However, construction workers or management may not be aware of the asbestos hazards. Unlike consumers who own homes and must comply with the toxic substance standards about asbestos debris disposal, workers may believe they are only handling tar, plastic, or gasket products. Thus, when these products are cut into, they are often dry cut or shattered. The fiber enter the air, exposing workers to a very high level of asbestos. Other types of paint adhesives, paneling, and other construction adhesives may contain mercury compounds. Most of these products are below the threshold for any human to perceive symptoms. However, if a construction building or facility manager or contract worker with multiple mercury information products with long isolated exposure times regulations, if enforced, would stipulate behavioral standards. Some of the most common found toxic substances in the construction industry include asbestos, a known carcinogen found in many older building materials. Silica dust, produced during activities like concrete cutting and grinding, which can cause silicosis. Lead, often found in older paints and plumbing, which can cause neurological damage and other health issues. Volatile organic compounds emitted from various construction materials and solvents, contributing to poor indoor air quality. Pesticides used to control insects and other pests, which can be hazardous if not properly handled. Formaldehyde, a preservative found in some wood products and resin, which is a suspected carcinogen. Polychlorinated biphenyls, formerly used in electrical equipment and construction materials, now banned due to their toxicity. Mercury, found in some older building components and can cause severe neurological effects. Cadmium, used in some pigments and coatings, which can damage the kidneys and liver. Crystalline silica, produced during activities like sandblasting, which can lead to silicosis and lung disease. Evaluating methods for assessing employee exposure to toxic agents is well established and is recognized explicitly in some sectors, such as construction, where toxic chemicals are essential. A qualitative assessment is a simple method to assess worker exposure to toxic substance, but it does not provide exposure estimates or exposure attributable risks. Another approach to exposure assessment is through physical and chemical monitoring techniques. Direct measuring techniques can monitor physical agents, while environmental monitoring is the most commonly applied method for chemical agents. This method can assist in identifying the extent and nature of exposure to workers, expected health risks, and measures that can be taken to reduce exposure. Other exposure methods are implemented to evaluate exposure health risks and the effectiveness of control measures. Evaluation should be carried out according to the type of activity and employees and the anticipated risks. Hence, there is no need for training and raising awareness among contractors and inspectors to conduct these evaluations correctly. The use of air sampling is essential to assess the amount of dust to which workers are exposed, their size, and the amount of free silica. These measures are forewarned as indicators of the extent of exposure to dust in the workplace. It is also important to conduct such tests in a working environment to assess and classify the contamination of